what's everyone's favorite cognitive bias? I would love to talk about that. Meagan, you go first.
Oh, mine is the rhyme as reasons effect, which,
yeah.
Foxy, Knoxy, they took and ran with, and that kind of, sculpted how we saw it. And then I was thinking they do that with celebrity couples, too. They combine their names and little, that's why Bennifer is probably back together, because they have the name, So,
Nice.
yeah.
So that is, can you describe what exactly that is?
Oh, yeah. It's just if something rhymes or if something is combined or catchy, it feels more true to you. So Foxy, Knoxy.
If the glove if the glove
fits, you must acquit.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So she's Foxy, she's sly, she's manipulative, she's bad.
Yeah.
It just slid right through your mind, and that's who you saw.
Yeah. Do you guys have faves?
Which is the one that is the misattribution?
The fundamental attribution
Yeah,
error?
the fundamental attribution error.
Or also
That was
called
gonna be
the
mine.
actor-observer bias.
Yeah, the actor-observer bias, where you, when you see someone else, you, do something that you don't like, say. You look at them and you decide that they did that thing because of the kind of person they are. But if you were to do the same thing, it would be because, there's all this context. It doesn't say who I am. So it's that bias of thinking that when people do things that aren't you think, well, they're that kind of person. They're the kind of person who would do that.
Positive and negative. When someone does something laudable, he got that award because, that he knows the judges, right? That you find some contextual reason that is not right. And when they do something bad, then it's because you're a bad person. This was a huge one in Amanda's case, because everyone looking at her behavior in those early days said, she reacted weird in this moment and in that moment. And of course, when you strip her behavior out of context and isolate some small moment and play it on loop a million times, it can look weird, right? And then you conclude via the actor-observer bias that it must tell you something fundamental about her character, because you're ignoring the fact that she's 6,000 miles from home, speaking a foreign language, and is very, very confused by what's even happening.
That particular one is maybe the most prevalent one that I see on a daily basis. It's the biggest problem in politics, and it's a big reason for so much of our division right now, because if somebody whose politics we disagree with does something that we disagree with, it is much easier for us to say, well, they're just a racist, or they're just a liberal Hollywood elite, or whatever, than it is to actually have to think more deeply about something that is a little bit more complex and the reason for
and what their
our
context
behavior.
might be, and
Right.
what it would actually be like to be in their shoes, thinking this is the best thought that I can have.
Right.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think the anchoring bias is another huge one.
Yeah.
Is that your favorite, though? I thought we were talking favorites.
I mean, it kind of might be my favorite.
Yeah, the first thing you hear is the thing you
such a
believe.
simple thing, and there's studies. There's a guy, E.T.L. Dror, he's a forensic psychologist, has done a study with fingerprint analysts and gave them biasing information, sort of anchoring bias, that a suspect confessed. And in group A, the person handing the prints to the analyst says, oh, by the way, the suspect confessed. Group B, they don't say anything. And the clever thing about this experiment is that he gave these fingerprint analysts the very same fingerprints they themselves had matched 10 years ago. So it's their own old casework. And then they, a lot of the time, switched their analysis and said match or no match based on whether they had been told that the suspect confessed. That tells you that fingerprint analysis is a lot more of an art than a science, if that piece of information can anchor them and totally shift their analysis.
Right. So that is the tendency to rely on the first piece of information that you get, regardless of whether it's valid.
Yeah.
So people might hear the name Amanda Knox and think murderer, because that's the first piece of information that they got. And it's so hard to undo that once that's been established in your brain.
And also just the cult of media and sensationalism. It was so exciting for her to be Foxy Knoxy the murderer. No one gives a shit that she's not. That's not fun.
Right.
Yeah, we were.
It's way less of a sexy story.
Yeah. So when we were coming in here today,
boring.
we were talking to people and they're just like, oh, was she found innocent? And it's like, yeah, people don't know.
Yeah.
It was not the same story.
It doesn't ping as well.
No,
Yeah.
it doesn't.
but hopefully it will. Okay, so my favorite, it is the just world hypothesis, which refers to our belief that the world is fair. We want to believe that those who do good will be rewarded and those who exhibit negative behaviors will be punished. And when we see an injustice happen, it is easier for us to believe that that person deserved it than that an injustice occurred, because it is, again, just like difficult to wrap our heads around the possibility that things could just be chaotic and out of our control, but we don't have that ability. And that's such a huge one in terms of cult stuff too, because so many people look at survivors, and this goes for rape survivors, this goes for all kinds of survivors, and think, well, they must have had something wrong with them. They must have been dumb. They must have
They're
been
sheep, something like
yeah,
that, right?
exactly. Like I would never do that, right?
Yeah, it's so sad because it really is like, it does a disservice to, like, first of all, these very people who are human beings, who are like smart and caring and thoughtful people, who are just being sort of like, their trauma is being diminished because they're basically being victim blamed.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, we're also failing to use these stories as an opportunity to to have a better idea of how our own minds work, because we're just saying, oh, they're other than us. My brain doesn't work like that. They're just broken people.
We have this real strong need to be smarter, to feel like we know better.
It's survival.
It is. But I would love for collectively everyone to get a little bit better at interrogating those instincts, which is why we are talking about this today.
Have you found that you do you now, Amanda, just find that you are not making assumptions as much as you used to?
I think what I do is I'm constantly questioning myself whether or not I'm making an assumption. And I'll catch myself making assumptions because, again, like if I can't, it's natural, it's instinctual to do so. I think the thing that I feel distinguishes me from other people in my life, say, is just realizing how negative the consequences can be towards not reevaluating and not doing that, like, sort of self-auditing of one's assumptions that you're making. And so when I see people, I'll argue with my sister, say, and I'll be like, oh, but you're making an assumption there, and she's just like it kind of goes over her head that like she's making, like, I'll try to point out, no, but you're assuming something right now, and like and it's like, no, like, please, just because you feel like something is true and that's the first thing that came to your mind when you examined the situation doesn't mean that it is true,
right?
And that impulse is so difficult to unpack for people who, I don't know, like, I felt it, how it resonated in my life and had a deep, horrible consequence in my life. So I try to be really mindful of it, of how I might be doing it. But then I find other people are not as, like, I feel like people, again, trust that first instinct way more than they trust evidence.
Right.
And you can't talk them out of their instincts.
Even being like adjacent to Amanda has been incredibly illuminating for me. Not just when, like, I'll find myself in some tabloid magazine and hilariously out of context depiction of who I am and what I'm about, right? That alone, like, gives you a little, like, oh, like, wow, how wrong is the portrait of every other human that appears in those pages,
totally.
Right? But seeing how wrong people are about Amanda on a daily basis, it's just this, like, continual reminder, like, oh, who am I wrong about?
Right.
I'm probably a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so as soon as somebody's telling me this person is like this, and this is what they're about, and this is what they're guilty of, and this is why we should hate them, especially when it has that negative valence, that's when I recall that, okay, like, I know there's people out there right now saying that about my wife. So let's take a step back. I don't know. What do I actually know? Have I read the court documents? You know, was I there?
I think there's so much resistance to it because we're taught gut instincts are so important, and they are
they are.
Yeah.
Also, you know, like, they're adaptive. They're, like, there's what is that? The Gift of Fear was also a really good, important book that is saying, okay, when I have a bad vibe about someone, I should maybe walk away, even if I can't explain to myself why. Like, it's not to say that cognitive biases can't be useful and also can't be true. It's just that if evidence comes to light that challenges what your cognitive bias made you think about a person or a situation, then allow yourself the opportunity to reevaluate your initial instinct.
I want to talk about some of the really benign behaviors that were interpreted as a sign of an evil murderer woman.
Totally. Yeah. So
Eating
I can
pizza.
Well,
Eating
yeah,
pizza.
but like,
Yeah.
eating pizza, buying underwear because like all of my clothes were locked away in a crime scene and my period started and I needed a new pair of underwear. So I went and bought a new pair of underwear. But of course, that just means that I'm a sex crazed maniac who can't not celebrate a murder by buying underwear. People would say that, like back in the day, Raffaele kissing me outside of my house in the immediacy of finding out that this crime scene was there. And I feel like those are the most closely examined, re-examined 3 seconds of my life that like there's no comparison to those. Like they have been on loop, they have been zoom in, zoom out, on repeat. Like it is slow-mo. Like the number of times those 3 seconds of my life have been regurgitated, and in order to show me as someone who was callous and didn't care that her roommate had been murdered. And people don't actually understand that in that moment, I reacted very differently than my roommate did, Philomena, who was also there. Like there were 2 of us roommates who were there to discover this crime scene. I reacted by sort of being quiet and confused and Raffaele giving me a kiss. My other roommate, Philomena, was hysterical and lost her mind and was like crying and weeping and doing her very dramatic reaction. And a lot of people look at that moment and think, well, clearly Amanda doesn't care about her roommate. Look at her other roommate. She's losing her mind. And what people forget is that Philomena saw inside Meredith's room. She saw the blood. She saw the body. She was deeply, deeply reacting to a very visceral realization of what had happened to Meredith.
Right.
I did not see into Meredith's room. I did not see her body. I never saw her blood. Like I did not see that horrific scene. And everyone was talking in Italian, so I wasn't even sure what they had seen in that room. I was hearing different things, and I was very confused, and I wasn't sure what was going on. So I was reacting from a place of being really confused and not having a lot of information and feeling sad because I think I realized that something bad had happened to Meredith, but I wasn't sure if it was even Meredith in the room. Like it was unclear to me.
Right. I also want to add that even if you had known, people react to trauma in myriad ways. There are like many people go into shock and like don't register what's actually going on yet emotionally. So even if you had seen it and were behaving that way, like that's still not evidence of anything other than that you are reacting that way. Yeah,
that was the thrust of Malcolm Gladwell's chapter in Talking to Strangers, was that Amanda reacts differently than other people do. She reacts in a guilty way. She's the kind of innocent person who can't help. But that was the thesis, right? And you're absolutely right that people react differently to trauma. There's also a cultural layer to that, where I think Italians are more likely to be very vocal and expressive, not only with their mouths but with their hands, whether it's a positive or negative emotion. So some cultures are more reserved, etc. But prior to all that is the media selection bias. That is choosing which little chunks of reality get looped and handed to you. Right. And there's how many hours of footage are there from that day where Amanda's just kind of looking tired or confused or scared? Right. Nobody saw that footage.
Right.
That footage wasn't played on loop, zoomed in, slow-mo. They find the one little snippet of the politician eating the hot dog, and then freeze frame, this guy looks like a doofus, right? Everyone can look like a doofus for a second if you grab the right screen cap.